Imagine sitting in a room full of your neighbors, a lawyer beside you, a camera rolling, and watching the most powerful person in your HOA realize, in real time, that they have already lost. That moment was real, and this family made it happen with nothing but patience, paperwork, and principle. There are neighborhoods that feel like communities, and then there are neighborhoods that feel like traps dressed up with nice lawns and matching mailboxes. For the Martinez family, theirs looked like the first kind, until the day a certified letter showed up and reminded them it was very much the second. Marcus and Diane Martinez had lived on Cedarbrook Lane for 7 years. 7 years of mortgage payments, of weekend yard work, of waving to neighbors across driveways. Marcus worked as an electrician. Diane worked part-time at a dental office while managing the household and raising their 2 sons, Elijah, 14, and Noah, 10. They were not wealthy people. They were not connected people. They were the kind of people who followed the rules, paid their dues, and trusted that the system worked the same for everyone. Their HOA was called the Cedarbrook Residential Association. It had a board of 5 members, and at the top sat a man named Gerald Fitch. Gerald had been president of the CRA for going on 6 years. He drove a pearl white SUV, wore polo shirts in colors that didn't exist in nature, and had a particular talent for making working people feel like they were one infraction away from losing everything they'd built. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late October. Diane pulled it from the mailbox, saw the CRA letterhead, and felt her stomach drop before she even opened it. Inside was a violation notice. The violation? A portable basketball hoop. The kind you buy at a sporting goods store for a few $100s. The kind that rolls into the driveway and rolls back into the garage. Elijah used it after school. Noah used it on weekends. Marcus had used it himself more than once, shooting hoops in the driveway as the sun went down, decompressing after 10-hour days on job sites. According to the notice, the basketball hoop violated Section 4, Article 9 of the CRA bylaws, a rule prohibiting temporary or permanent recreational structures visible from the street for more than 2 hours at a time. The fine was $500 per day, retroactive for 14 days. That was $7,000 already owed, with the clock still ticking. Diane sat at the kitchen table and read that number 3 times. $7,000, growing by $500 every single day. Marcus came home that evening to find her still sitting there, the letter flat on the table in front of her like something that had fallen from a great height. They talked for a long time that night, after the boys were in bed. The easy thing, the thing Gerald Fitch probably expected them to do, was pay, apologize, and roll the hoop into permanent storage. A lot of families on Cedarbrook Lane had done exactly that. Paid fines they didn't fully understand. Removed things without question. Shrunk themselves down to fit inside the shape the HOA had decided was acceptable. But Marcus had a particular quality that served him well in his professional life, and even better in moments like this. He was methodical, careful. He did not like being told something without being shown the paperwork behind it. So that night, instead of writing a check, he pulled out the full CRA bylaw document, 37 pages, dense as a lease agreement, and started reading. Diane sat with him, yellow highlighter in hand. It took most of the night, but by the time they were done, they had found something that changed everything. The bylaw Gerald cited was real. Section 4, Article 9 existed exactly as described. But 4 sections later, there was a clause that the violation notice had not mentioned. The enforcement of any bylaw, the document stated, was required to be applied uniformly and without exception across all residents. Selective enforcement, the clause specified, was grounds for the violation to be declared invalid. Marcus went for a drive the next morning before work. He drove slowly down every street in the Cedarbrook development. He had his phone mounted on the dashboard, recording. What he found was staggering. A trampoline on Birchwood Court, visible from the street, no violation notice posted. A swing set on Maple Run that had been there for years. 3 separate homes with sports equipment, a pitching net, a batting cage, a lacrosse rebounder, all sitting in open driveways. And on the corner of Cedarbrook Lane and Primrose Drive, directly behind a hedge that barely hid it, sat a full above-ground swimming pool in the backyard of none other than Gerald Fitch himself, installed without so much as a permit application on file with the county. Marcus came home, downloaded the footage, and made a spreadsheet. 17 properties in violation of the same or stricter bylaw sections than a portable basketball hoop. 17 properties that had received no letter, no fine, no warning whatsoever. That was the day the Martinez family stopped thinking about paying the fine and started thinking about something else entirely. They contacted 3 attorneys before they found the right one. Her name was Patricia Okafor, a property rights lawyer who had spent 15 years handling HOA disputes and had a reputation for walking into community meetings and walking out with settlements. She reviewed the documents in a single evening. She reviewed Marcus's footage. She looked at the spreadsheet. Then she told the family something that shifted the entire weight of the situation. She told them they hadn't just been fined unfairly. They had been handed a case. Patricia filed a formal response to the CRA on a Thursday, disputing the fine, citing the selective enforcement clause, and requesting an emergency board hearing. Under the CRA's own bylaws, the board was required to respond within 15 days. Gerald Fitch had the notice on his desk by Friday morning. The hearing was scheduled for the 3rd week of November. Marcus circled the date on the kitchen calendar in red marker. Then he went to the electronics store and bought a second camera. The Martinez family didn't just prepare to defend themselves, they prepared to expose everything. Next chapter: what happened when they walked into that room, and why Gerald Fitch would never forget the night a working-class electrician and his lawyer dismantled 6 years of unchecked power in front of the entire neighborhood. The Cedarbrook Residential Association held its meetings in the clubhouse at the end of the main road, a beige building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs that always smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. It was not a grand room. It was not built for drama. But on the 3rd Tuesday of November, it became the setting for something that the residents of Cedarbrook Lane would talk about for years. Marcus and Diane arrived 20 minutes early. Patricia Okafor walked in beside them, a leather briefcase in one hand and a calm, unhurried expression that belonged to someone who had done this many times before. Marcus carried a small tripod. Diane carried a folder thick enough to function as a weapon. They set up near the back wall, positioned the camera, and waited. Gerald Fitch arrived and immediately noticed the setup. He said something to the woman beside him, the board secretary, and she looked over at the camera and then quickly looked away. Gerald's face did the thing faces do when a person realizes the room they thought they controlled has changed shape while they weren't paying attention. By the time the meeting was called to order, something unexpected had happened. The room was full, not the usual smattering of retirees and concerned homeowners who showed up to argue about parking rules. Full. 37 residents had turned out for a Tuesday night HOA board meeting, which, by Cedarbrook standards, was practically a revolution. Marcus had quietly spoken to several neighbors in the weeks leading up to the meeting, not to recruit them, not to organize a protest, but simply to tell them what the fine was, what the footage showed, and what the spreadsheet contained. He had let people draw their own conclusions. Apparently, they had. Gerald called the meeting to order and moved immediately to the matter of the Martinez violation, clearly intending to process it quickly, collect the fine in principle, and move on. He introduced the violation, read the bylaw section aloud, and stated the accrued total, which by that point had grown to over $12,000, in a tone that suggested the matter was already settled. Then Patricia Okafor stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She simply introduced herself, stated her credentials, and informed the board that she was there on behalf of the Martinez family, and that she had several items she wished to enter into the formal record of the meeting. Gerald told her she would have to wait for the public comment portion. Patricia smiled pleasantly and pointed to the section of the CRA bylaws that guaranteed legal representation the right to speak during active violation hearings. Gerald looked at the document. He nodded once, tightly, and told her to proceed. What followed was 45 minutes that no one in that room would forget. Patricia began with the selective enforcement clause, the same one Marcus and Diane had found at the kitchen table at midnight. She read it aloud, word for word, slowly enough for every person in the room to absorb it. Then she presented Marcus's video footage, played on a laptop that she had brought specifically for this purpose, and connected to the projector the board used for slideshows. Every trampoline, every swing set, every piece of sports equipment sitting unbothered in driveways across the Cedarbrook development. Every property that had received no letter, no warning, no fine. 17 in total. The room shifted. You could feel it. The way people straightened in their folding chairs, the way a few people exchanged glances, the way one older woman in the second row quietly took out a pen and started writing. Then Patricia brought up the permits, or rather, the absence of them. Gerald Fitch's above-ground swimming pool, installed the previous spring, had required a county permit. The permit had never been filed. She had pulled the county records herself. She placed the documentation on the board's table, directly in front of Gerald, and left it there. The room was very quiet. Then the neighbors started speaking, not in the orchestrated way of a planned demonstration, but in the organic, unstoppable way of people who had been waiting for permission to say what they already knew. A man from Birchwood Court stood up and described receiving a fine 2 years earlier for a decorative flag his daughter had given him. A woman from Maple Run talked about being threatened with fines over a welcome mat. A couple from the far end of the development described being told their garden border violated aesthetic standards, a rule that, when they looked it up, did not exist anywhere in the actual bylaw document. One by one, the picture assembled itself in front of the room. Gerald Fitch had not been enforcing community standards. He had been enforcing his preferences against the people he had chosen, while exempting himself and his associates from the same scrutiny. Gerald attempted to respond several times throughout the evening. Each time, Patricia quietly, precisely, and without a trace of hostility, redirected the board's attention back to the documents. The board secretary had stopped taking notes somewhere around the 40-minute mark and was simply staring at the table. By the end of the meeting, the board voted, 3-2, to suspend the Martinez fine in full, pending a formal review of all outstanding violations across the development. Gerald voted against. It did not matter. Within 3 weeks, an independent review had been commissioned by the CRA at the request of the membership. Within 6 weeks, Gerald Fitch had resigned as president. Within 3 months, the board had been restructured, the enforcement policy had been rewritten, and the Martinez family's fine had been officially wiped from the record. The basketball hoop stayed in the driveway. Elijah and Noah still used it after school. Marcus sometimes joined them as the sun dropped low over Cedarbrook Lane, the same as he always had. The same driveway, the same hoop, the same neighborhood. Just a little quieter now, without all that noise coming from the top. Some people, when they get backed into a corner, write the check and stay quiet. The Martinez family got backed into the same corner and came out the other side with a lawyer, a camera, a spreadsheet, and 37 neighbors standing up in a room that smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. They didn't just fight back. They changed the whole game. And that, right there, is why you never assume the little guy doesn't have options. The Martinez family wasn't wealthy. They didn't have connections on the board. They didn't have influence. What they had was time, attention to detail, and the willingness to read 37 pages of HOA bylaws at midnight when most people would have just paid and moved on. HOAs count on compliance. They count on people being too tired, too busy, or too intimidated to push back. The moment you read the actual documents, the moment you pull the public records, the moment you show up with someone who knows the law, everything changes. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment below and tell us about your own HOA experience. Subscribe so you never miss the next one, because trust us, there are more stories just like this one, and they only get better from here.